Hello everyone and welcome to round 10 of Vidit Chess Olympiad 2024. Today it was the all important India versus USA match, the first versus second seed. India was leading the Chess Olympiad by almost 2 points now and was on the verge of converting everything, but the last hurdle was, of course, Team USA, the top seed with 4 2700 grandmasters, and that is led by none other than Fabiano Caruana, the world number two at the start of the event, but he has fallen down. So it was a rematch between Gukesh and Caruana from the 2022 Olympiad, and Gukesh was white this time, not black like last time, and let's just move on to the games. He starts with d4. Caruana goes knight f6, c4, e6, g3, the Catalan, d5, bishop g2. Here Caruana plays an interesting move, that is knight c6. So it's kind of a very rare move here. Black generally plays a lot of other lines, something like dc4, bishop e7, bishop b4, knight d7 even, but not knight c6. This is somewhat like a tango variation which occurs after d4, knight f6, c4, knight c6, g3, g3, e6, bishop g2, d5. But this is not really a popular or a good way also to counter the Catalan. So Gukesh goes knight f3. Here he could have transposed into some kind of a main line of open Catalan with the c4, but he doesn't go for this. He plays a very interesting move, that is rook b8. I have no idea why he played rook b8 first, but okay, the idea is clear because he wants to play c4 and then b5. So Gukesh here just takes on d5. Black goes bishop d4, knight c3, and ed5. So it's all preparation for Caruana till now, and Gukesh is definitely not in his preparation, so he has been thinking a lot. Gukesh plays bishop g5, h6, bishop f6, queen f6, and castle. So he just simply exchanges this good knight that is defending the d5 pawn, and he says that your knight is on c6, which is awkwardly placed, and so you can't really push c6 to defend the d5 pawn. So how do you like protect the pawn? Caruana plays bishop c3, just taking out the attacker. Gukesh goes bc3, and the position is like very good for white here. I don't think Caruana would have liked to enter this kind of position with Gukesh, because white is a very safe king. He has this very strong center with e3, even knight coming to e5, sometimes maybe like c4, and this is a very good Catalan, I would say. Caruana goes castle, knight d2, hitting the pawn and getting way for e4. He goes knight e7, white plays e3. White doesn't really want to play e4, but he wants to play c4 so that these pawns will become some kind of target later in the game with these two open files. So Caruana plays bishop e6, which is a pretty normal move, stopping c4. Gukesh goes queen a4, hitting the a7 pawn and threatening c4. a6, and here Gukesh changes the plan and goes for e4. The difference here is black has played a6, so if after going for something like this queen g6, white goes knight c5. c6 is not really ideal because this kind of structure, white can go rook b1, rook b6, and have a weakness on b6. So after e4, black goes c5, queen a3, okay, cd4, white has e5, and then taking this knight. So black goes b6, rook b1, rook e8, dc5, and d4. So Caruana is trying to complicate the game here because okay, I won't say complicate because If white wants, he can just go for the draw here with this takes and knight b3. Black has to go bishop b3, rook b3, something like bc5, and at least I think white can just go rook c1, hitting this. If black takes, white just takes here, and I don't think white can really lose this game. But white wanted something more and go in for c4 here, saying if you take, I'll just take with the queen, and I'm a pawn up. So black goes queen g5, white goes to d1, c5, and f4. So even though black has managed to save the c5 pawn, but white has this very strong central pawns which are going up the board, and black can't really stop it. Black goes queen h5, f5, and here black takes rook b1, and queen e2. So black had to go for something immediate, because if he had gone simply bishop d7, white can just, I think, simply go something like knight f3 first, then take here, and the queen is like really awkwardly placed with threats of h3 g4 coming. So after queen e2, white takes fe6, queen d2, ef7, king f7, and queen c5. So it might look like what the white king is a bit in open, but the problem is this knight is not really coming to g4, and if the knight can't come, the queen can't really do much here. So black goes king g8, rook f1, king h7, queen e5. The queen is trying to come to f4 and then play e5, getting this bishop into the game. Black goes queen e3, king h1, and d3. The only asset of black's position is the d pawn, and he has to push it. It's worth noting that the queen is so strong here, it's just pinning this to knight and rook, and paralyzing both the pieces, so neither the rook nor the knight can move. He plays bishop h3 with some kind of bishop d7 threat, just threatening to take the piece, but black goes d2 here, threatening queen e2 and d1. White goes bishop g4 and just stops any kind of queening potential. Black plays queen d3, king g2. The d1 square is nicely protected by white bishop and rook, so black is not really queening anytime soon. So he takes on c4. Here Gukesh plays an interesting move, a4, which is a bit surprising because black can just take the pawn, and here I think he might have thought that rook f7 is very dangerous, but I think after rook g7, it's just a draw, because rook e7, d1 queen, bishop d1, queen d1, and I don't think anything is going to happen. But Caruana here went queen c6, which is a bit slow or passive, I might say, because here white has the a4 pawn. It's kind of the same idea, because if white goes something like rook f7, then black will go queen g6, defending this. So white just went queen d4 here, threatening the d2 pawn. Black goes queen g6 here, which is the biggest mistake of the game. But we can't really blame Caruana, because he was already on time, and the position was not that easy. If he went for something like queen c2, then I think rook f2 just straight up wins the pawn. So queen c6 is interesting here. Gukesh goes rook f4, just defending this bishop and threatening to take the d2 pawn. Caruana goes queen g5, we go h4, queen g6, and just simply queen d2. The threat of queen g5 is very interesting, because if white went queen d2, black just goes knight g6 and takes the piece here after rook f2, queen g4. But after h4, queen g6, and queen d2, white is just simple 2 pawns up without any kind of simply 1 pawn up and without any kind of counterplay, and this super strong bishop and this white square weaknesses for black is just game over. White goes queen d7, h5. Here it's just a simple threat because white is threatening the knight, and this if this knight moves, white can just go bishop f5 and take the queen. So after h5, white goes bishop e6, rook b6. It's a Black is just trying to defend by one move, but it doesn't really work because white goes bishop f7, queen d6, and here Gukesh just simplifies and takes the final h5 pawn, and white is just 2 pawns up. Karuna still played a few moves, but it was not really anything important. Black goes knight c6, bishop e2, a5, bishop b5, knight e5, rook f5. This should be still dominating this knight, and white has just 2 extra pawns. Black goes rook e6 and king f2. The king will come, and then white will start pushing the pawns, and it's just over. So Karuna doesn't waste much time and resigns immediately. And with this win, we are at now 1 point lead against USA. So we move on to the next game, that is Praggnanandhaa versus Wesley So. And this game was the only loss for India in this whole event till now, which is not so great because everyone would have loved to see India go undefeated and win the gold, but it's fine, this can happen. So Wesley goes e4, Praggnanandhaa goes e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, the Italian game, bishop c5, castle, knight f6, d3, d6, c3, a6, a4. So this is all a very well known theory. Black goes bishop a7, knight d2, castle h3, bishop e6, bishop e6, f6. So this is a very well known idea for black. Black goes bishop e6, just neutralizing this strong Italian bishop, and he says I'm okay with the double pawn, but I'm also getting this open f file, the future of getting the queen to the king side by going queen e8, queen g6, and then knight h5, knight f4. And white says that with the double pawn I have a lot of compensation because I might go d4 sometimes, and even if you come something like queen e8, knight h4, knight f4, I will just go g3, king g2, and I'm solid enough. White goes b4, black goes queen e8, rook a2, knight h5, knight c4, knight f6, knight f4, b5, and knight b8. So this knight reroutes itself to d7, from where it can go to f6, looking at the white king, or it can jump to c5. White goes king h2, threatening g3, knight d7, g3, knight g6, ba6, and king g2. So white has finally managed to get this g3, king g2 setup, and it's really hard for black to like break this setup or even do anything against the white king, because if black plays h5, white will just go h4. Knight g3 is well covered by the g3 pawn, and black can't really do anything on the f3 knight, which would be ideal because white can simply just drop back to d2. There are some lines where white can just go knight f1 and knight h2 and just keep both the knights in front of the king, stopping all kinds of attack from black. So black goes d5 here, knight d2, knight f6, rook e1, rook d8, queen e2. So now after d5, black has managed to get some space, but on the other hand, the e5 pawn has become weak, and now it's a target for white. Black goes queen c6, c4. White doesn't really want to take here because this will undouble the pawns, and d4 will also help getting rid of the e5 weakness. But of course c4, which opens this diagonal for the bishop and hits e5 pawn, and it also threatens to like take on d5 twice and get a knight on e4. Black goes rook f7, takes, and knight f1. Here the main idea for white is to just get bishop out and exchange this bishop, and maybe in the future go something like this. Black goes h6, knight h2, rook d7, a5, takes and takes. So with this exchange, it might look like black has almost managed to equalize, but it's not really the case because the e5 pawn is still weak. With a5, white has managed to stabilize a weakness on a6, and the queen has to always stay on this 6th rank to protect the pawn. Here Praggnanandhaa goes a bit wrong with rook d3. Here he tries to cover up the f1 a6 diagonal, but here white could have gone something like this rook c2 rook c4 maneuver, so that he can go queen c2 next and just take the c7 pawn. But Wesley so misses this and goes rook d2 instead. Black goes queen b5, takes rook d3, queen c2, and then rook d7 back. So black says both your knights are like very awkwardly placed on h2 and f3. It's not really doing much. If you come here, I'll just take it. My a7 bishop is pretty okay, good at least, and the a5 pawn is also a bit of weakness. But Wesley goes queen a2, king h7, and queen e6. Here he could have gone for this very nice idea, knight g4. If black takes knight g4, hg4. The threat here is very interesting. White just wants to go knight g5. If black takes, white can go rook h1 and mate him, because this g8 square is covered by the queen. But white misses this and goes queen e6. Black again misses this and goes queen a5. But the problem here is not only just knight g4 has the knight g5 idea in the future, but knight g4 is also threatening to take this, and the d7 rook is hanging. So black can't really take here. But Wesley again misses this and plays queen f5, which is still a very good move because this pins this g6 knight, and white is just simply threatening queen knight h4 and taking this knight. Black plays queen a2. Here white again goes passive with rook f1. I don't really understand because white can just play knight h4, after which black has to come back to f7 to protect this knight. And here I think knight f3 is very good for white. But Wesley doesn't go for it. He goes a bit passive and goes rook f1. Here Praggnanandhaa again makes a mistake and goes rook e7, which is now a blunder because of exactly what Wesley does, which I guess Praggnanandhaa missed with so less time. Wesley goes bishop h6. So this is a very nice sack. Just saying you can't take with the g pawn because the f6 knight is hanging, and if you take with the like king h6, then I can just simply go knight g4 and hg4, and the h file opens up and you will get mated easily. So black takes g8-6, white takes queen f6, queen e6, and knight g4. So white is already a pawn up, and with the exchange of queens, white will easily win the endgame. So black goes a5, white goes queen f5. He wants to now exchange the queens at like a more favorable situation, so that he can get the pawn to f5, king g7, queen h5, knight h8, trying to get the knight to f7 so it can defend both h6 and e5, knight h4, king h7, and here Wesley finishes it off with the brilliant knight h6. Exactly on 41st move. This is just a wonderful game because I think even knight f5 is just clearly winning because this hits the e7 knight. h6 is also falling, but of course knight h6 is much more flashy. The point is, if black goes queen h6, white will just take queen f6, king h6, and knight f4. Knight f5, forking the king and rook, and just winning the game. So Praggnanandhaa just resigned after knight h6, and with this win, USA has managed to equalize the score with 1-1. And we have to move on to the next games, that is between Arjun and Dominguez. So Dominguez is a very solid grandmaster, and who rarely loses with black. But it was Arjun this time who is in tremendous form here, and Dominguez can't escape him. Arjun goes d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, the Slav defense, knight c6, knight c3, a6, and c5. So Dominguez goes for the Chevenengo Slav, threatening b5, but Arjun goes for the c5 variation, which is a solid one, just stopping any kind of b5 expansion. Black goes b6, cb6, knight d7, just threatening queen b6 and c5 in the future. White goes a3, queen b6, knight a4. White is now trying to use the c5 square because the c6 pawn is a little bit of a backward pawn, and the square in front of the backward pawn is also always a weakness. White goes g3, e6, bishop f4, bishop d6, e3, and a5. So white has managed to get this bishop on to an exchanging situation with this f4 bishop, which will lead to the weakening of the c5 square, which white really wants. White plays rook c1, rook castle, queen c2, just threatening the c6 pawn. Bishop b7, bishop d3, h6, and castle. It's nice to see that even though the bishop doesn't have any square in the to move back, it's just spinning this bishop. So even if black goes for something like g5, white can just take on d6. So black goes rook e8, threatening some kind of e5 in the future, but it's not really much of a threat because white can just take everything and then put the knight on c5. White goes rook d1, e5, d into e5, knight into e5, knight d4. With the pressure on the c6 pawn, threatening knight f5 in the future. Black takes knight d3, bishop d6, queen d6, and rook d3. So white has managed to exchange his white colored bishop and the dark squared bishop for the dark squared bishop and the black knight, which was very important in covering the c5 square. And now white is a very comfortable position. The knight can move to c5. The d4 knight is very strong, and the c6 pawn is backward. White can play f3 next, stop all kind of knight jumps to e4, and white is a very comfortable position. Black goes bishop a6, rook b3, knight d7, and here white just exchanges one pair of knights so that black doesn't have any kind of attacking potential on the king side with the knight e4, knight g5 idea. But here black doesn't exchange but goes for the exchange sack, trying to complicate the position a bit. White takes knight a8, rook a8, knight b5. So white's a full exchange up here, but black has some kind of compensation because this bishop can come to b7, and this f3, h3, and g2 squares are weak for white. The knight can simply jump to e5 and have a lot of pressure on the white king. So black goes queen c6, a4, g6, rook c3. White says, I'll just take on c5, exchange everything, exchange the queens, and be a pawn up in the rook endgame. So here black just blunders and goes bishop b5, just giving up his only source of compensation, that was the bishop. And now I think white should just be winning. A b5, queen b5, rook d1, hitting the d5 pawn, queen c6, rook d3, knight f6. White just takes the knight away from d7, from where it could have jumped to e5, f3, and puts it on f6, so that it's always forced to stay on f6 to defend the d5 pawn. White goes e4 here, a very concrete move, saying if you take with the pawn, I'll just go rook d8, rook d8, rook d8, and exchange the rooks, and I'm easily winning. And if you take with the knight, I'll just take the d5 pawn with the rook. Black goes for knight e4, white takes rook e4, rook d5, rook e8, and white even manages to exchange the pair of rooks. Rook d8, knight g5. Black says, I have some kind of compensation here with the weak white squares, the queen cutting through to h1 and the knight threatening to come to f3 or h3. White just takes on e8, queen e8, queen d3, hitting these two squares, knight e6, queen e3, hitting the h6 pawn, and also covering this f3 square for any future knight jumps. Black goes h5, rook d6, queen b3, queen e5. Now white is also threatening some kind of back rank mates with rook d8, if the knight ever moves. Black goes h4, white just takes, no need to allow him to play h3, and now white is himself threatening h5 and breaking open black's king side. Black goes queen c4, h5, queen d5, king f1, and g5. Black couldn't really take on h5 with the pawn because white just goes queen g3 back, exchanges the queens, and the rook will start taking up the pawns. And if he went queen h5, then white just takes on h5 with the queen and is just simply winning. So black had to go g5, white goes h6, threatening rook e6 and queen g7 mate. Black goes king h7. Here, if white had gone something like rook e6, the problem here is black goes queen c4, not taking here first. If white goes king g2, black will just repeat here moves, and if white comes back with the queen, now black takes on e6, and there is no mate on g7. So white doesn't go rook e6 and goes rook d7. The rook is doing a very good job stopping any kind of queen d1 checks, and if black goes here, white can just simply go king g2 and queen g3 block the checks. Black goes queen c4. Here I think white should have gone for something like king g1, as I said, and queen g4. I think he can just move back queen g3 and stop the checks. But Arjun goes for a bit of a wrong move, that is king e1. Black goes queen b4, rook d2. Here I think if black went something like king g6, the knight coming to f4 and all sorts of knight jumps here with d3, forking the king queen, knight g2 checks, and this spin. Black could have got some kind of a counterplay, but queen g4 is not really best because white gets rook e2. Now white is just threatening queen e4, exchanging the queens again. Black goes queen g1, king d2, king g6, and h4. h4 is a very nice move because g5 pawn was really doing a great job protecting the king, and if this pawn moves away, white can just simply go f4, f5 and just mate the black king without even needing to exchange the queens. Black goes gh4, queen e4, king h6 and queen h4. So white has managed to exchange these pawns, the h2 pawn and g5 pawn, and open up the black king. So black goes king g6, queen g3, finally exchanging the queens. Queen g3, fg3, king g5, rook e3. The problem for black is these two pawns are separated, so white can just go and pick up the pawn. If this pawn was on b4, then I think it would be a pretty difficult task for white to move around and pick up pawns, but here it is very easy. Black goes king g4, king e2, white comes to f2 first, protecting the g3 pawn, then white will go here and just take the pawn. Knight g5, rook e5. As this knight moves away from here, white just simply goes for both the pawns, just giving up the g3 pawn. Black goes f5, just rook c5, a4, rook a5, knight h3, rook a4, king g3, rook a3, and Arjun just finishes off perfectly. King g2, rook h3, king h3, and king f3. So with this pawn is just rolling down the board. This pawn is just clearly blocked by the white king, and Dominguez just resigns. And with this win, India is now again in the lead with 2-1. So we move on to the last and final game, that is between Vidit and Aronian. So this was a very uneventful draw, I can say, but not without a lot of pressure from Aronian. So he goes e4, Vidit goes e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Here Vidit also goes for the Italian game. Castle, knight f6, d3, d6, c3, castle, h3, and here instead of a6 like Praggnanandhaa, Vidit goes for bishop b6, which is also a very common move. White goes a4, a5, rook e1, h6, stopping again the bishop g5 ideas in the future. Bishop b3, rook e8, knight bd2, bishop e6, knight c4, threatening to take here. Bishop a7, bishop e3. So all very common theory. Bishop into e3, queen into e3, And here with it goes for the interesting d5, just opening up the position and saying all my pieces are perfectly placed on f6, e6, and c6. I don't think I should be any worried at all for before opening up position. Aronian goes d5, knight d5, knight d5, bishop d5, rook e3. Here I think white should have definitely gone for something like d4 if he wanted to try, because bishop b3, queen b3, and the b7 pawn is now attacked. And if black takes here, rook e8, queen e8, queen b7 is an interesting idea. Rook b8 and white can take on c7, and now black will be in a bit of a problem here, equalizing. But Aronian doesn't go for all this and just simply plays rook e3. Black goes rook e6, knight e1, knight d2, rook g6, threatening this g2 pawn with the threat of this bishop. White just exchanges the bishop d5, queen d5, and queen f3. White just simply goes into the endgame, and I think Aronian was also not really over trying here, because he's not really in the greatest of form in this tournament. So black goes rook d8, knight c4, f5, queen d5, rook d5, and rook d1. So here it is just clearly an equal position in game, and this e5 pawn might be a weak, but white really can't do much. Black plays rook f6, king f1, rook f8, king e2, g5, king d2, and e4. So black is saying that I'll just exchange this d3 pawn with the e5 pawn, and then it will be 3 pawn versus 3 pawn on the king side, and 3 versus 3 on the queen side, which is just an easy draw. White goes king c2, e d3, rook d3, rook d3, rook d3, and b6. With this, black is just protecting the a5 pawn, and if white goes rook d7, black can just play rook f7 and exchange the rooks. Here white goes an interesting move, f4. I think the best would have definitely to be rook d5 and then go knight e5, exchange the rooks, and go into the rook game, where I think white would have been a slight favorite, because the king is on c2 and white can just immediately start creating a pass pawn on the queen side. So white goes f4 here, gf4, rook f3, and by taking this pawn, black has like ruined its structure with these two isolated pawns, but has gained a lot of time to get the rook into play with rook e8 and rook e2. Black goes rook e8, rook f4, rook e2, king b3, and knight e7. So black just defends the f5 pawn, threatening this rook g2. White goes g4, fg4, rook g4, king f7. And now as all the pawns on the king side has almost cleared up, white can't really make any kind of progress in the queen side with the king on b3, which is even stopping any kind of b4 break. White goes knight a3 to move to knight b5 and threaten some kind of knight c7 ideas. Black goes knight f5, rook c4, c5 here, which might look a bit ugly, that the b6 pawn is not a bit of weakness. White can move here and start putting some pressure, but the black rook is active enough to go after the h3 pawn and have a lot of pressure. White goes rook f4, king f6, knight c4, rook e6, just defending the b6 pawn. White goes king c2, h5. Black is threatening to go h4, and then h2 pawn will become a slight target, and even black can maybe try for something more. White goes king d3, king g5, rook e4, rook f6. So black can't really exchange the rooks, because then the b6 and a5 pawn will start falling. So white goes knight d2, knight g3, not only just going after the rook, also covering the e4 square, which will stop the knight from coming to e4. Rook c4, rook d6, king e2, rook e6, still stopping knight e4 in the future. b4, cb4, cb4, and knight f5. And now I think it's just clear that white can't really do anything with all the pawns gone. After b5, only one pawn here and one pawn here. White can't make any kind of progress. White goes knight e4, king g6 just drops back. Doesn't need to get into this Rook's file and get discover attack. But so white just goes king d3, a b4, rook b4, and h4. Black finally manages to lock this pawn here. If this knight moves, black can go rook e3 and take the pawn. White goes rook b5, knight e7, knight d2, and black starts giving checks, king c2, knight f5. Now black is also playing some kind of advantage here, because black is setting knight d4. There are some knight e3 checks. White stops with knight f3, king f6, rook b4, knight e3, king d2, knight d1, and white black just starts giving checks. King c1, knight f2, hitting the h3 pawn. So white has to take on h4, and here black just goes king f5. I think this is also winning. This is also easy draw after rook d3 and picking up the h3 pawn, but black doesn't really want to even give this b6 pawn in the future, so just moves away from f5, knight d2, knight d3, king b1, and knight f4. So this knight maneuver just blocks this rook from the 4th rank, and also just threatening h3 in the future with rook d3, and also hitting the knight d2 knight. White comes back king c2, rook d4, and white black just picks up this a4 pawn. Rook h6, rook a4, rook b6, and knight h3. So all the pawns are gone here. Rook knight versus rook knight, it's just a draw, and both of them agree to the draw here. And with this win, India has won the 10th round against the super strong USA, with very nice wins from Gukesh and Arjun. And with this win, India has actually won the Chess Olympiad 2024 with even one round to spare, because India is currently at 19 points, and second is China, who is at 17 points. Even if China wins, it will get to 19 points, but India's TV2, that is the game point, is already 31.25, and China's TB2 is 26.5. So even if India loses 4-0 tomorrow and China wins 4-0, China will only get to 30.5, and India already has 31.5. So there is no way any team can go above India in the final standings, and we can already celebrate. So India wins the Chess Olympiad 2024 with a very, very clean victory, and without really having any kind of trouble against any of the teams, which is just amazing. So thank you everyone for watching. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and I'll again be back with the final round of this Olympiad. All that doesn't really matter because India has already won, but I'll see you then. Bye bye.